There is no question in my mind that one of the most impressive individuals that I've met is someone who's taken my breath away, is Haideh Moghissi. Well, you thought I was going to say somebody else would. And I look at this fellow over here, who I had the privilege of getting to know on several occasions. I was just speaking to Marie about the last time that we saw him, which was in a restaurant on Peel Street above de Maisonneuve called Entrecôte Saint-Jean, which some of you will know. If you don't want to make a choice, go there, because there's no choice about what to eat. They have one item on the menu. And he was there, about 80-something years old, in the accompaniment of a strikingly younger, blonde, very attractive woman, and he was his usual charming self, as he always was on the streets of Montreal and when he was Prime Minister. And I looked at this brochure from the foundation. It says, he was a passionate, courageous, and articulate visionary. I agree with that. From my limited knowledge of him over those years, I would agree that that's pretty accurate. He demonstrated a dual commitment to be engaged by his community and to engage it. I think that's true, and I think that's Haideh Moghissi, actually. Now, there are two Haideh Moghissis, and I hope we have the right one. The first one grew up in Iran and had an established life there. She got a degree there. She rose, and she had an internship, I think, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, rose through the National Archives, or its equivalent, was a co-founder of the National Union of Women, was an articulate participant in the Iranian Revolution, and life brought surprises. And in a story that could easily become a movie, she and her family decided to leave Iran. That story itself is a wrenching story and an inspirational one. And she was welcomed by Canada, where she's been since 1984, where she started a second life. She and her husband, Saeed Ranama, started all over again with nothing. And Queens was very good to her and to her husband and family, and she got her degrees there. I should give Queens credit for this, just as we've taken credit for Ron's York degrees. And she has struck out in a number of different directions. I'm not really going to recite the titles of her 7 monographs, co-authored, authored, and edited, or her 35 articles, or her many conferences. But I think many of you know already that she has done groundbreaking, courageous work in the field of feminism and women in Iran, the connections between women and feminism and Muslim fundamentalism, questions of women's status in the Middle East, the impact of 9/11 on the whole issue of revolution and gender equity, the issues of diaspora. I mean, these are, I think, well known to many of you. Her books have been translated into a number of languages. But she is a person like Prime Minister Trudeau, and I say this very hesitantly because I'm going to embarrass her. She has, or exudes at certain occasions, an aura that I find very overwhelming almost. It's very impressive. I used to say that if we went to an event in the 1970s with 500 people in the room, you could tell when you walked into the room where Prime Minister Trudeau was. Somehow or other, you could just, it wasn't the spotlight shining down on him, but somehow or other the logistics of the room, the way the room organized and buzzed, you knew he was there. And there are several other people I've known who've had that characteristic. I've been fortunate to know. Haideh Moghissi is one of those people. She courageously agreed to serve as associate dean with me for several years. That was a great act of courage. And she took on the international portfolio, the external portfolio, which is basically what she lives and breathes. I see she has acknowledged that she is a public intellectual. I would take issue with that. I would say she's a global intellectual, which is a little larger than a public intellectual. A public intellectual, I think, ties into the Canadian scene, or the North American scene, or the Western European North American scene. She is a global figure. When I heard that one of her books was being translated into Korean to add to all the other languages, I wasn't surprised, because she has become a heroic figure in feminist scholarship, in issues of equity. She is a colleague and has also become a friend and an inspiration. I'm hoping that this fellowship will convince her that she should stay active and abandon all thoughts of retirement or any thought of reduced activity. And this will be seen as because I'm working on this already, and I will see it as a new impetus. So it is my privilege, really my pleasure, to introduce my colleague and friend, Haideh Moghissi.
Well, you were right, Martin. I am embarrassed, actually. Thank you so much for this generous, very generous introduction. And thank you, Dr. Shukri and Dr. Forrest, for your warm reception of us. It was surprising that this morning, many people who were kind to write to me and congratulating me, it was because I appeared on the Globe and Mail, not because I got the fellowship. And that also encouraged some family members to seriously object to Ali, my son, who is one of the vice presidents of Torres Star, saying that how come the Globe has a feature and not you? They are going to be on your back for a while. Let me start by saying that even though I have had the good fortune of having received several major grants in Canada and the US in support of my research projects, the Trudeau Fellowship has a special significance for me. 27 years ago, when on a cold, gloomy January morning, my family and I were being driven to the airport through Tehran's still sleepy streets, sitting between my two sons, one a teenager and the other one only 3 years old. I was taking mental snapshots of Tehran's bare streets and alleys, thinking that my life had ended. It was not only because we were not sure whether the men who had received the proceeds from the sale of our house with the promise of passing us through the checkpoints at the airport would meet their commitments. Both my husband, Saeed Rahnama, and I had to quit our jobs. He as a UNDP officer in Tehran, and I as a director in the National Archives of Iran. We had been forced to leave behind our friends, our relatives, the comfort and security of life in your birthplace, and most of all, our dreams and hopes for freedom. Simply because, like thousands of other secular intellectuals, our opposition to the clerical rule, violations of human rights, and ruthless persecution of the left, the religious minorities and ethnic communities had placed us in the ranks of enemies of the Islamic regime. Perhaps it is a poetic justice that 27 years later, I have been honored with a Trudeau Fellowship for my research and other scholarly activities that fall within the areas of human rights and dignity, and what I understand as responsible citizenship, two of the foundation's areas of focus. Throughout my career, I have never published or made a presentation without a specific audience and a goal in mind, always hoping that my words might contribute, even in the most modest of ways, to meaningful, sustainable change in the relations of domination, authoritarianism, and injustice. I have indeed been very fortunate that my university, York University, encourages such a scholarship. I have paid, nonetheless, an enormous cost for the choice that I have made in life, but surprisingly, I have absolutely no regrets. So I would like to think that the Trudeau Fellowship has first and foremost bestowed on me recognition of the value of this effort. However, we live in a new, exciting, and at the same time challenging political climate. I never thought that in my lifetime I would see the eruption of mass protests in the Middle East and North Africa and the falling of several of its corrupt rulers. The grassroots uprisings against social inequality, injustice, poverty, and corporate greed have now captured the streets of North America and Europe. And who knows what shape this global movement for social and economic democracy might take if it continues. And in the case of the Middle East, if the movements are not aborted through foreign interventions. At the same time, we witness the creeping advances of religion in the public sphere, not only in the Middle East, but here in Canada, in the US, and in Europe, where radical Islamism, Christian rights, and other religious orthodoxies seem to be in a race to see who can gain more special privileges and rights, making a mockery of such celebrated notions as democratic rights, gender equity, equality in the law and before law. The changing local and global political and social environment challenges us to think deeper about the complexities and nuances of such taken for granted issues as multiculturalism, minority rights, democracy, human rights, and secularism. Even though, despite what Martin said, it is no secret that I am at the end of my career as a full-time academic, I am thrilled to receive the Trudeau Foundation's Fellowship, as it provides me with the opportunity to welcome this challenge. So I would like to thank my university for nominating me and the Trudeau Foundation Adjudicating Committee, Dr. Forrest and his colleagues at the Trudeau Foundation for this honor. Thank you very much.